We're switching gears now. We're moving from the poetry of Virgil, which is stately and grand and kind of long form, into the poetry of Ovid, which is more playful and intimate and is prone to digression. You'll notice as you're reading Ovid that is episodic in nature. Ovid can't quite keep his focus on any specific thing. He likes to move from one piece of the story to a totally different story, back to the story he was telling. It is strongly digressive in his approach to things. It makes for a more playful kind of a poetry, and as we'll see, a very different form of entertainment than we see with Virgil. In the case of Ovid, his dates are here 43 to 17 of the Common Era, 43 from BCE to 17 of the Common Era. In the case of Ovid, what we see is people caught in internal conflicts. A lot of what we see is going to be that kind of a conflict. People are torn between two courses of action, usually passion on the one hand and duty on the other hand. And as we saw in Virgil, duty is supposed to win. Well, in Ovid, it's the other way around. Passion almost always wins over duty. We're going to see lots of small details, regular people involved in great events. There'll be kind of people on the sidelines who get focused on as some monumental historical thing happens in front of them, or we'll zoom into people who are main characters in the action, but a lot of the time he spends is on the periphery of things, watching things from the edges, zooming in, zooming out as he likes. We'll see hints in him of a philosophical outlook of a world based on change. The idea of a kind of fumbling, roiling conglomeration of atoms that comes together in one shape and then falls apart and comes together in another shape is a kind of worldview that we'll see Ovid working within. Ovid was from a very prosperous family. He had the best education money could buy, which at the time meant a training in the verbal arts. Ovid was being trained up to be a great lawyer. And he made a phone call home at some point, and Mom, Dad, I've got great news, I want to be a poet. Well, back in those days, there was still money and fame to be gained if a person was involved in poetry, but the normal course of events would have been to go off and use that education, the training in the verbal arts that he had been trained up to such a high degree, a fine pitch of educational perfection, would have been for him to go off and become a wealthy senator, a provincial governor, something like that. But Ovid had other plans for himself. He was indisputably the greatest poet of his day and the generation after Virgil. The ancients had, interestingly, mixed feelings about him. He was clearly a genius, and no one thought otherwise of him. And as I say, he was definitely the greatest poet of his day. But we have this wonderful preserved quotation from Quintilian, a literary critic who, reading Ovid, said, "He could have been better if he had controlled his genius rather than letting it control him." It sounds a little bit, actually, if you've seen that depiction of the life of Mozart in the film Amadeus, has a little bit of a ring to it there. There's a man in the grip of a tremendous talent that allows him to do just about anything, and he allows the talent, his kind of virtuosic talent, get the better of him and take him off into directions that may or may not be exactly what one should do with epic poetry. He got himself into trouble with the authorities. We're not exactly sure how. Augustus himself was angry with Ovid, and that resulted in Ovid being banished. He went away for some unknown error. Here's his birthplace of Sulmo, as shown here, Rome, right nearby. And then Ovid gets tossed all the way over to the other side on the coast of the Black Sea and has to live in this place, Tomis. Poor guy. He's a very sophisticated, urbane person. He's living out there in the sticks at a time when maybe the greatest city of all time was just waiting for his talents and his excitement to engage with it. He has to spend his time out on the Black Sea. So because of this error, he has to live his life out there in exile. Near the beginning of the course, we defined myth as a traditional tale with secondary partial reference to something of collective importance told by someone for some reason. And that was the definition that we're using in the course. It's our tried and true definition. Walter Burkert, the great scholar of Greek myth, came up with it, and the comma, after the comma is the struck addition told by someone for some reason. With Ovid, we get a different definition of mythology, and I'll just go ahead and toss this one out. Ovid thinks of myth as a clump of stories, probably untrue, about ancient characters that may or may not have actually existed, with some deeper truths in them, or not, but they're surely fun to hear. In other words, Ovid's definition of myth is a little bit like what we see the definition of mythology that is worked out today in Hollywood, in TV spectacular shows, in comic books of all kinds. Who knows exactly what the relationship is between these stories and some anchoring insight into the grand structure of the universe? However, boy, they're really fun to hear. Ovid jumps right into the pool of myths and tells and retells just about everything. His Metamorphoses stands in a unique position in the sources that we've looked at in our class. Ovid tries to do a synoptic view of mythology from beginning to end. He tries to look at the whole thing. And all the way up till historical times to Roman times. If you've got time on your own, we're only reading bits and pieces of the Metamorphoses. I highly recommend the rest of it for those of you who are able to. The idea of his ideas, his take on any of the particular myths we're going to study is usually the one that wins out over time. So if you've seen a myth retold, whether that's on Wikipedia or an Edith Hamilton or any of the standard contemporary resources that people go to learn about Greek myth, if you see a myth being retold, chances are you're seeing Ovid's version of the myth. He becomes so authoritative because of his encyclopedic nature and his incredibly playful spirit and wonderful skill and virtuosity in his poetic technique. He becomes the main go-to source for the usual, trying to get the usual understanding of what myth is about. Now this is interesting because, as we'll see, Ovid has his own spin on things. He does things in his own way, just as any of the authors we've seen already do. So his shaping of the tradition, I think, can't really be underestimated. He has an incredibly powerful place. Ovid will present us in his sewing together of all these traditions with a coherent group of old tales. And coherent needs to be put in, there's a little footnote there. It's coherent insofar as it all holds together, but Ovid will make it jump and move and bounce about. The seams that are used to sew together the different traditions move in zigzag patterns. You'll see Ovid can't follow a straight line for the life of him. He's bored by that. It seems as though he would just not find that interesting, so instead he zigs and zags in always fascinating, interesting ways. Now, this sewing together of all these traditions presents something slightly different than the zeroing in on specific episodes within the mythic tradition that we've seen, whether that's the founding of Rome and the story of Aeneas, or whether that's the tale of Orestes and all the nasty things that happened to him, or Odysseus. Ovid's going to try to do the whole thing, everything all together. So with him, we start to see something more than just myths. We see mythology as a kind of study in and of itself, this large corporate collection of themes. Now, in Ovid's stories, we'll see lots of themes. Number one, the theme of change and transformation. Remember those spartoi that grow up out of the ground? We saw those in our last slide, these spartoi that grow up out of the ground. That's just the kind of thing Ovid is going to love to talk about. We've got a dragon that gets slayed, its teeth get pulled out, they get tossed into the ground, and up from those seed teeth grow up plants that turn into human heroes. He loves that kind of thing. Transformations is going to be our really central theme here, and definitely one of the most important of them. They're going to be a line between human and animal is going to be an important one that he looks at, and you'll recall, as this slide depicts, our tale of Agave and how she mistakes her son for a sacrificial animal, slices off his head. The line between humans and animals is going to be one of the pivotal moments of transformation and change that Ovid's going to be interested in. And just as we've seen in the past, when that line gets crossed, strange things are likely to happen. Violence is just around the corner, always, in Ovid's tales. It's not, much as he's an elegant and playful storyteller, the materials that he's dealing with usually are deadly serious, and usually someone dies. Violence galore in the stories. Theme 2 that we're going to see, lots of examples of illicit love and passion. Love is sometimes a euphemism. We're going to see lots of rape, as in here, a depiction of the rape of the Sabine women. The idea of rape in Ovid's tale is not something that he's going to present it in a way that shows a certain kind of titillation, excitement, a transgression that happens. The violent outcome that results from these transgressions is going to be exhibited as well. But I think we'll feel, in some cases, we'll see a human turned into a flower, and that will seem like a charming story. In other cases, we'll see a rape that results in a human woman turned into an animal. In both cases, I think violence is close by the surface, and Ovid means to pull it out and set it up for us. So don't be lulled into a sense of the charm of these stories as the violence is occurring, and that's definitely going to happen with when we see these scenes of illicit erotic passion turning into rapes. Another theme that we'll see is a strong sense of links between the divine and the human world, but there are dangers as well when these kind of linkages happen. We're going to see when the human and divine worlds get close, as here when Diana is spotted. Watch out. If you're a human being and you spot a goddess, run the other way. And even if you try to run, you're still going to get caught. The bad things are going to happen. So when the human and divine dividing line is crossed or come close to, it's like you're approaching a kind of third rail. Danger is waiting, and we see it visited on those that get too close to the divine world. Ovid is maybe a little bit like Prometheus. He's stealing fire from the gods, and when he does, there's punishment that happens in each of these cases. We're going to see a final theme that I'll just point to is a theme of bodies. Ovid is very much interested in the physical, corporeal nature of you and I as human beings. Bodies are something that he focuses on in a very close-up way, and we see them enter into we see their fragility, we see their changeability, we see human beings as being anchored to them, sadly, and we see them as, in a way that humans tend to resist, we see them as all the things that the wider natural world sees them. So for example, when predatory animals look at you and I, they don't probably think of, oh, look at that nice human being, I might like to get to know them. Instead, you and I look a little bit more like a carved out piece of meat ready to eat. In Ovid's world, our bodily nature is run through a whole template of the different dimensions that it has, and he is nowhere about to hide the fact that you and I are flesh, and that flesh is fragile. It may be prey for some other animal, and it's changeable, and it's very temporary. Ovid's poem, I'm not going to lay out the whole beginning here. We didn't assign that part of the reading for class, but I thought we could set it in useful contrast to some of the things we've seen in the other stories that we've looked at. The heroic epics of the Iliad and the Odyssey and the Aeneid, focusing in that first word on a pivotal, important theme of what the epic's all about. For the Iliad, it was a war rage. That's not something we read for the class, but we made reference to it. For the Odyssey, the opening word is man. What is it to be a male-gendered human being? That's what the epic was going to be about. For the Aeneid, it's the arms and a man. Virgil tells us he's going to sing about both of these main Homeric themes. For Ovid, he jumps in a way that slightly bends the traditional formulation. His first word is new things, in Noah. Actually, it's a preposition. A prepositional phrase begins his epic, not a concrete noun that you could jump onto. And the thing that you're going to jump into is this prepositional link to Noah, new stuff. That's the beginning of what the epic is all about. Translations of it vary. The typical one that is latched onto is looking at, in his first word, the idea of forms changed into new and different bodies. This is what Ovid's going to focus on, not some single thing that's just sitting there waiting for us to discover it, like a little specimen that we're going to put under a microscope for the whole epic. Instead, what he's going to look at is changing things in and of themselves as they change. That's what he wants to do, and that's what he's going to dig into. Now, the Metamorphoses is going to focus on moments of destruction. Change is going to happen, but these moments of change are not going to be gentle and sweet. They're going to be violent. And when they do happen, there's always pain and there are suffering of individuals. The metamorphosis, any individual change that's talked about, could be a punishment. It could be a form of justice that's delivered out. More often, it's a kind of random visitation on someone that just happened to step into some situation that was precarious, and before you know it, they're changed into something else. And the judgment that's visited on that person may be deserved, may not be deserved. It is not a world that is ruled by some overarching theme of justice. We're not going to see that happen. Yeah, more often, instead, what we see in the metamorphoses are bodies that are victims. These are bodies that are porous, they're wounded, they're dismembered, they're dissolved, they're turned into a thing instead of a human being. In the case of stories that we've already seen, like Actaeon and Pentheus, Ovid is going to focus on these. He likes to talk about these traditional tales of humans getting ripped up. They're going to be dismembered. In the case of Narcissus, a story that you all might already know, you'll see Ovid's version of it probably puts different spins on it than ones you've seen before. We're going to see a body just kind of wastes away, just disappears. In the case of sometimes we'll have humans that change into animals or plants or animal, but always that change is accompanied by some kind of destructive possibility. Now, trying to understand this focus that Ovid has on bodies, some have pointed to the historical climate of his time. He's dealing in an imperial age in a way that Virgil has one foot back in an earlier age and then also looks forward to this imperial age. Ovid is dealing fully in an imperial age, and this is an age of high spectacle. The Colosseum is up and running. We've got human bodies that are put on display and being ripped up before our very eyes by other animals. We're seeing the porous, fragile nature of human bodies exhibited to us in the form of entertainments, you and I as classical Romans. Ovid's putting us inside of that world, and it may well be that his own approach to this stuff is influenced by certain carelessness to the human form that is exhibited in the world around him in Rome, the high empire of Rome. From here on, we'll start to look at specific points in Ovid's story, and these themes we'll see pulled out over and over again.